Ouvimos agora Chester Wisniewski, Field CTO Applied Research da Sophos, com a apresentação A Luxury We Cannot Afford.
Bom dia, I'm Chester Wisniewski from Sophos, and I want to talk a bit about changes in the threat landscape and sort of some of the views that my team has of the information that we're able to collect from our customers and partners at Sophos, and hopefully give you a little bit of a view of some of the changes that are happening right now with the threat and where the ones I'm most worried about and the things I want to draw your attention to. I'm not going to talk about myself much other than I've been at Sophos for over 20 years now, so I've got a lot of experience working in cybersecurity, and mostly my time at Sophos has been involved in research, working with our XOps team. And that's where the information I'm presenting to you today is coming from. We have about 550,000 customers that we get telemetry and information coming into our XOps team to analyze. We've got about 500 some analysts that are doing all different things. Some of them are data scientists working on artificial intelligence. Other ones are analyzing malware threats, web threats, email threats, etc. But all of that information together, it gives us a really rich set of information for us to analyze what is really happening with threats out in the field. And more importantly, it's not always about what the threat is as much as where organizations are failing in their ability to block those threats. Most of those threats we know about and are somewhat predictable, but yet people are still being victimized by those threats. So by analyzing this data, we can kind of see where we're struggling to apply security correctly, even when we may have the right tools. We may have many of the right processes, but some of these things, we've got gaps. And those gaps are, of course, something if we can learn about them, we can do a better job of addressing them and deliver a better security outcome at the end of that. So I'll start with just a really brief overview of the state of things, which really my focus today is to talk about time. That's why it was in the title of my presentation. I think we don't have nearly enough time, of course, and the criminals are getting better and better at shrinking the amount of time necessary to do what they're doing when they're breaking into our networks and trying to steal our information. And this is largely as the criminals have specialized, right? 10, 15 years ago, a criminal group or gang might be 2 or 3 individuals, and somebody had to write the phishing attacks, and somebody had to write the malware, and somebody had to, there was a lot of tasks involved, and because they were doing all of the tasks, they weren't terribly efficient at them. But as money, especially from ransomware, has completely transformed the wealth of profit that the criminals can make from an individual cyber attack, everything has started to turn into a specialization on the cyber side or on the criminal side, no different than it has for ourselves, right? Like we have specialists who work on specific, I just mentioned, in XOps, we have spam analysts and we have web people and we have malware analysts, and we specialize. And the criminals, as they're specializing, are getting incredibly efficient. And most attacks these days start out with like a professional break-in service, right? We often refer to as an initial access broker. There's people who are good at just breaking in, and then they sell you to another criminal who's good at writing malware. And of course, we're also starting to see a little bit of artificial intelligence coming into this on the criminal side. There's actually, I think maybe next week we're publishing a blog and a little paper on this topic, because it turns out AI is much better for the good guys than the bad guys. The criminals have largely failed at having much success in using it. But I think there are specific cases where we need to watch this very carefully, and I think one of them is actually here in Portugal, because Portuguese attacks, most of the Portuguese attacks we see in Portuguese, especially social engineering attacks, are often in Brazilian Portuguese. And so they are very easy for often people here to detect that's not really targeted at us, right? We know that that's probably a scam, or it certainly seems off. It's not really from my bank, because that's wrong. And with things like large language models, generative AI, ChatGPT, criminals can write perfect Portuguese in Brazilian Portuguese or Portugal Portuguese. It's no longer a challenge, and it no longer looks like Google Translate. And so one of my fears is in countries that have been less targeted because the criminals lacked skills in writing really well-crafted social engineering attacks against our users, the last barrier has been removed now because they will be able to use these free and open models. They don't even need to pay for them in order to start crafting more specialized attacks for everyone in the world and not just English and Spanish speakers where they may have the most talent in writing in a foreign language. And of course, they even have money laundering as a service. This shouldn't be any news. I mean, criminals have had money laundering services forever. But as they specialize in every one of these things, they're getting very, very fast and very efficient at conducting their attacks. And I think that is one of the big gaps I'm seeing in our customer base is the ability to respond quickly enough. They may be getting the alerts, but they can't respond to the alerts before the attack has already caused enough damage. And I was amused by this, so I thought I'd share it. In some of the research we were doing on criminalization of attempting to use artificial intelligence, there's a few of them now that are making their own versions of AI and actually doing training against it and selling that as a service to other criminals now. So I don't believe that this is going to result in much malicious stuff that's terribly of use. I think it's going to be limited mostly to the social stuff. But no different than every vendor probably on this stage, if you come up to us during the coffee break, can tell you about what we're doing with AI. The criminals are the same. They see it, it's possible, there's possibilities to use this for negative things, and they're out there actively working on this problem, trying to see if they can weaponize this amazing new tool that we're all trying to use to help you defend yourselves better. So, to me, I think, I already set this, but really want to try to learn from others' mistakes. Like if we see where people are making mistakes, what can we take from that to make sure we're not repeating them? And most of the information I'm presenting to this morning is from our active adversary report for tech leaders. It's available on our website. I'll put a QR code up later if you're interested in reading it. But this is research from all of our incident response cases. So every time somebody calls us in to help them with an incident, we're analyzing all that information and trying to figure out, how did the criminals get in? What were the tools that they used? What order did they use those tools in? And are these things that we can write detections for and, share through threat intelligence forums and with community groups? And when we look at a survey we did earlier this year, this is CISOs and IT directors who are responsible for securities responses on what they considered their biggest concerns. And the top three are they're worried about their tools being misconfigured, they're worried about 0 days in their internet-facing appliances and software and services, and they're worried about their lack of internal expertise to maybe analyze all these threats and look at these alerts and effectively deal with them. But when we look at what actually happens when we look at our incident response cases, we can see that it's not even in the top three. We're still dealing with stolen passwords, unpatched vulnerabilities, and ultimately exposed remote access tools, VPNs, RDP, this kind of stuff. So the things 0 days are something worth worrying about, but that's not how people are actually being victimized. They're being victimized by the gaps. These unpatched vulnerabilities aren't because they didn't know that they needed to patch them. It's because they had assets they didn't know they had, so they didn't patch them. Or other IT priorities got moved to the top of the priority list to move infrastructure to the cloud because it's going to save the business money, and as a result, there wasn't as many people to go and do the patching, and it got delayed because of other projects. And a lot of this time is also about when the criminals are attacking. So we adjusted our data set so that wherever the business was located, we were looking at their business hours, and we counted from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. what we would call business hours of the victims to see when are the criminals attacking. And we can see that over 80% of the attacks occur off hours for the business that was the victim, no matter where that victim was. It doesn't matter if that victim was in India, that victim was in Europe, that victim was in Canada, where I'm from. It's almost always off hours. And then of the ones that were during the work hours, these orange dots are the weekends. So if you don't have 24/7 operations, you're unlikely to have somebody observing an initial attack when the criminals are often the noisiest, right? It's literally like a break into your house. They smash through the window and there's some alerts that pop up initially, and then they figure out how to get around your security tools after they trigger a few of those alerts. But time is of the essence, and the criminals, we don't know if it's intentional. It could just be coincidence from time zones, but the majority of attacks are occurring off hours. Now, this is data over the last couple years. of attacks, specifically the dwell time from the initial entry into the victim's network until the actual bad thing happened. And what I'm concerned with is this bold line through the middle here. That's the median, right? So you've got the full range from our information, but the median is slowly dropping. And we went from 13 days 3 years ago to 11 days to 8 days over the last 3 years. So from the initial break-in until the bad thing is about 8 days. Now, if it's ransomware, which is about 80% of the incidents that we analyze, in ransomware, it's gone from 8 days to 5 days. So we now have less than 1 business week between the initial break-in and when the bad thing happens. And if we break that down a little further from the start of the attack there, 9 days to 5 days. I had my number slightly wrong, but we're shrinking this time. And then specifically, around the middle here, about day 3, is when the data is stolen. So when we think about our time to respond, it's critical that we move as far left as possible, right? Because the first day, really all they've done is break into some credentials and are roaming around the network a little bit. But by day 3, they're exfilling the data out to the cloud somewhere where the criminals can exploit it and hold you hostage and extort you. And of course, that's your GDPR event as well. Now you've got data that you probably are going to have to start dealing with the regulators and all the other things that are going on. And if you manage to not be able to evict them from your network by day 5, that's when they're exploding the bomb and encrypting the data. So if you're interested in more of the details, we put a lot of science and we publish all of our methodology in our report. All the data's out there. You can feel free to download that from us. But the one piece of advice I have for people responsible for defending their networks is you've got to respond quickly and you've got to respond with the knowledge of what you need to do. If your team is spending their time trying to figure out what the threat was and what they need to do about that threat, in the 2 days that they're figuring that out, the data has been sent away, and time is of the essence. I hope that was useful and informative for you. If you have any questions during the break, I will be with the Sophos team in the break area, and enjoy your morning. Thank you.